High in the red rock canyons of the Apache lands, where ancient spirits still whisper through the wind, a forsaken boy clings to a sheer cliff face. Cast out by his own people, he faces certain death as the merciless sun beats down upon stone. Walls that have claimed countless lives. His parched lips move in silent prayer, echoing the horse songs his grandmother once taught him. Just as hope begins to fade, the ground trembles with approaching thunder, not from storm clouds, but from the legendary mustangs known as the spirits of the wind. Led by the Great Bay stallion Náshdóítso, these wild horses are about to change the boy's destiny forever. How could a child abandoned to die become the legendary king of the wild stallions? Before we begin this incredible journey, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days before his exile, Dancing Cloud sat at his grandmother's feet as she crushed sacred herbs in her weathered stone mortar. The evening air carried the scent of sage and desert rain, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to the rising moon. His fingers traced the intricate beadwork of her medicine pouch while she hummed the old horse songs. Her voice, as ancient and steady as the mountains themselves. "Grandmother," he whispered, "tell me again about the spirit horses." Falling Dove paused in her work, her eyes distant with memory. The firelight caught the silver in her hair, transforming it into a crown of starlight. "They are the children of wind and thunder," she began, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "When the Great Spirit first shaped our world, he gave them the freedom of the skies and the wisdom of the earth." But before she could continue, angry voices erupted from the council lodge. Dancing Cloud felt his grandmother's hand tighten on his shoulder as Chief Black Bear's thunderous voice cut through the evening peace. "The horses are dying, our strongest stallions, our fastest mares, 6 dead since the moon turned full." Dancing Cloud's heart clenched. He knew which horses the chief spoke of. He had seen them himself, had watched them grow weak and fall, had tried desperately to understand why. Each morning he would sneak to the horse enclosure, pressing his small hands against their fevered flanks, whispering the healing songs his grandmother had taught him. But nothing seemed to help. "It is dark medicine," another voice declared. Sharp Knife, the warrior who had never approved of Dancing Cloud or his grandmother's old ways. "The signs are clear. Someone walks 2 paths, speaking to spirits that should be left alone." The boy felt his grandmother's grip tighten further. In the firelight, he saw fear flash across her face, quickly masked by determination. "Go inside, little one," she whispered, pressing the medicine pouch into his hands. "Whatever you hear, remember. The spirit horses never abandon their own." But Dancing Cloud didn't go inside. Hidden in the shadows of the lodge, he watched as Sharp Knife pointed an accusing finger at his grandmother. "The boy spends too much time with the horses. He speaks to them in whispers, touches them with hands that carry strange medicine, and now our strongest horses waste away." The tribe's suspicion, carefully nurtured by Sharp Knife over many moons, burst into full flame. Even those who had once smiled at Dancing Cloud's gift with horses now turned suspicious eyes toward his grandmother's lodge. The boy wanted to run forward, to explain that he had only tried to heal them. But his grandmother's last words held him back. Chief Black Bear, his face heavy with the weight of leadership, spoke the words that would shatter Dancing Cloud's world. "The old ones taught us that sometimes, to save the many, we must sacrifice the few. At dawn, the boy will be taken to the Red Cliff. The spirits will decide his fate." Dancing Cloud's world spun like autumn leaves in a windstorm. The ceremonial knife would cut his ties to the tribe, and the red rocks would become his final test. It was the ancient way, handed down from times when the Apache first learned to read the harsh wisdom of the desert. In the darkest hours before dawn, his grandmother came to him. Her eyes were dry, but her voice carried the grief of mountains. "Listen well, my little cloud dancer. she whispered, pressing something cool and smooth into his hands, her ceremonial knife, its handle worn smooth by decades of sacred work. The spirit horses remember. When you hear their hoofbeats in your dreams, when the wind carries their songs, remember, you were born to bridge two worlds. This is not your ending, it is your beginning. As the first rays of sun painted the canyon walls gold, they came for him. Dancing Cloud walked with his head high, the knife hidden against his skin, his grandmother's last words echoing in his heart. He did not cry when they performed the ritual of separation, did not flinch when they painted his face with the symbols of the Forsaken. The red cliff rose before him like the wall between life and death itself. As they led him to its base, a sudden wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it the distant sound of thunder. Or perhaps, he thought, remembering his grandmother's stories, it was the sound of hooves. As Dancing Cloud huddled against the cliff face, memories rose like mist in the morning sun. His fingers found the medicine pouch at his waist, and within it the brittle piece of deerskin, where his grandmother had written the sacred horse songs. Though he could not read the marks she had made, the songs lived in his heart, as natural, as breathing. He remembered the first time she had taken him to the horse enclosure when he was barely tall enough to reach a pony's shoulder. The pre-dawn air had been crisp with autumn's bite, and steam had risen from the horses' backs like earthbound clouds. "Watch," she had whispered, settling onto a smooth boulder. "Listen with your heart, not your ears." Her voice had begun low, almost too quiet to hear, a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The horses had lifted their heads, ears pricking forward, and then something magical had happened. They had begun to hum, deep in their chests, answering her song. "The first horse songs," she explained later, "were given to our people by wind. Runner, the great stallion who carried the thunder in his hooves. He taught us that horses do not speak as we do. They sing with their bodies, with their breath, with the way they move through the world." Dancing Cloud had practiced every morning after that, sitting cross-legged in the dust, watching, listening, learning. The other children had laughed at first, calling him Horseboy and mimicking his quiet songs. But gradually they had noticed how the wildest colts grew calm under his touch, how injured horses would seek him out, laying their heads in his lap as he hummed the healing songs. One mare in particular, a dappled grey named Morning Mist, had become his closest friend. She had been born weak, her legs trembling like spring saplings, and many had said she should be left to the spirits, but Dancing Cloud had sat with her through her first night, singing softly, his small hands pressed against her chest, feeling. Her heartbeat strengthened with each passing hour. "You have the old gift," his grandmother had said, watching him with Morning Mist. "The one that came before words, before treaties, before we forgot that all creatures are our brothers and sisters." Under the sky, she had shown him how to braid sacred herbs into the horses' manes, how to read the messages in their movements, how to understand the different songs needed for healing, for strength, for speed. But it was the dream songs that had fascinated him most, the ones his grandmother said came from the spirit horses themselves. These were songs without words, pure melody that seemed to float between earth and sky. When he sang them, it felt as though his spirit could gallop alongside the wild herds that roamed the high places. "Some say," his grandmother had told him, one evening, her voice dropping to a whisper, that before the Spanish brought horses back to our lands, our people could see the spirit horses dancing in the clouds. They say these horses were made of wind and starlight, and only those with the purest hearts could hear their songs. Now, clinging to the sun-baked cliff, Dancing Cloud began to hum one of these dream songs. His throat was parched, his lips cracked, but the melody rose true and clear in the hot air. Far below, dust devils danced across the canyon floor, and for a moment in his fevered state they seemed to take the shape of running horses. The song spoke of freedom, of hooves striking thunder from stone, of manes flowing like storm clouds across summer skies. It was a song of wild places and wilder hearts, of the bond between earth and sky, horse and human. As he sang, his fear began to fade, replaced by a strange certainty. He was no longer merely singing the song, he was becoming it, each note a heartbeat, each breath a prayer. In the distance a horse whinnied. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, transformed into something ancient and powerful. Dancing Cloud's song faltered as he strained to listen. Was it real, or just another memory rising from the depths of his parched mind? The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of horse, sweet grass, warm hide, the dusty perfume of freedom. The sun climbed higher, turning the red cliff face into a forge. Dancing Cloud pressed himself against the narrow ledge, feeling the heat radiating from the stone through his thin shirt. His grandmother's knife, wedged into a crack above his head, cast a thin finger of shade across his face, the only shelter he had found since dawn. 3 handspans below his feet, the ledge crumbled away into nothingness. 3 handspans above his head, another ledge jutted out, tantalizingly out of reach. He had tried climbing higher when they first left him, but the rock was treacherous, smoothed by centuries of wind, until it felt like polished bone beneath his fingers. His throat burned with thirst. The morning's dew, which he had carefully licked from the rock face, was long gone. The desert heat shimmered around him, making the distant canyon floor dance and waver like water. He knew it was dangerous to let his mind dwell on water, but he couldn't help remembering the cool, sweet taste of the stream near his grandmother's lodge. A shadow passed overhead, a golden eagle riding the thermal currents that rose from the heated rock. It wheeled once, twice, its wing feathers spread like fingers against the fierce blue sky. Dancing Cloud watched it with a mixture of hope and dread. Eagles were sacred messengers, but they were also hunters, patient enough to wait for exhausted. "Prey to weaken. I am not your prey," he whispered, his voice rough as sand. "I am Dancing Cloud, grandson of Falling Dove, singer of horse songs." The words of his lineage gave him strength, even as his parched lips cracked and bled. The eagle screamed once, high and piercing, then banked sharply to the east. Dancing Cloud followed its flight with heavy-lidded eyes until something else caught his attention, a cloud of dust moving along the canyon floor, too fast and purposeful to be a natural dust devil. His vision blurred, then sharpened. Horses, wild horses, moving like wind-given flesh, their hooves striking sparks from the stone. At their head ran a stallion the color of storm clouds at sunset, his mane flowing like black smoke, his movements as fluid as water over rocks. "Náshdóítso," Dancing Cloud breathed, recognizing the great bay stallion from his grandmother's stories. The name meant "he who runs like thunder," and even from this height, the boy could see why. The stallion moved with a power that seemed to shake the very earth, leading his band through the twisting canyon with the confidence of one who knew every stone, every shadow. The horse songs stirred in Dancing Cloud's memory, but his throat was too dry to give them voice. Instead, he pressed his hand against the hot rock, feeling the vibration of those distant hoofbeats travel up through the stone. The rhythm matched his heartbeat, or perhaps his heartbeat had slowed to match the rhythm of their running. Time became fluid as honey in the sun. The boy drifted between waking and dreaming, between earth and sky. Sometimes he thought he saw his grandmother's face in the patterns of the rock, heard her voice in the wind that whistled past his ledge. Other times he was sure he could hear the spirit horses running through the clouds above him, their hooves striking thunder from the sky itself. When the shadows began to lengthen, he used the last of his strength to press his palm against the red rock, leaving a print in his own blood. Not in despair, but as a mark of endurance. His grandmother had taught him that even the smallest ceremony could be an act of power. "I was here," he whispered to the stone. "I am still here." The sun touched the western rim of the canyon, painting the clouds in colors that matched the stallion's coat. Far below, dust rose again. The horses were returning. Dancing Cloud forced his eyes to focus. This time, they were moving more slowly, as if searching for something. The great bay stallion kept stopping, lifting his head to the wind. Then, moving on with deliberate steps. As darkness crept up from the canyon floor, the boy heard it. The sound that had haunted his dreams since childhood. A call that was part whinny, part song, part thunder. Náshdóítso's voice echoed off the canyon walls, and in his delirium, Dancing Cloud could have sworn the stallion was calling to him. Night fell like a blanket of stars over the canyon, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made Dancing Cloud's teeth chatter. The moon rose, full and bright, transforming the red rocks into towers of silver and shadow. In that ethereal light, reality began to blur at the edges, and the ancient stories his grandmother had told him seemed to come alive in the darkness. The horses had not left. He could hear them moving below, their hooves striking rhythmic patterns against the stone. Occasionally, a soft nicker would drift up to his ledge, followed by the rustling sounds of grazing. They seemed to be waiting for something, though in his exhausted state he couldn't imagine what. As moonlight flooded the canyon, Náshdóítso's coat gleamed like polished copper. The great stallion paced at the base of the cliff, his movements deliberate, calculating. Every few steps he would stop and look up, his ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. Behind him, the herd spread out in a loose semicircle. Duns, bays, and pintos, their coats painted silver by the moon. A mare whinnied softly, and the sound seemed to trigger something in the stallion. Náshdóítso reared suddenly, his forelegs pawing at the air, his voice rolling like thunder through the canyon. As he came down, his hooves struck the cliff face with devastating force. Chips of stone scattered like rain. Dancing Cloud watched, in wonder, as the stallion began to climb. Not straight up, that would have been impossible, but following a series of narrow ledges that switchbacked up the cliff face. Each leap seemed impossible, each landing precise as a hawk's strike. The other horses followed, picking their way up in single file, creating a living chain of flesh and spirit. The boy's heart thundered in his chest. He had heard stories of the spirit horse's ability to walk between earth and sky, but to see it, his grandmother's words echoed in his memory. They are the children of wind and thunder. Now he understood. Náshdóítso reached a ledge just below Dancing Cloud's position. In the moonlight, the stallion's eyes gleamed with an intelligence that seemed almost human. He nickered softly, not the thunderous call from before, but a gentle sound, like a mother calling her child to safety. Without conscious thought, Dancing Cloud began to sing. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry as the desert itself, but the horse song rose true and clear in the night air. It was the song of trust, of bonds deeper than blood, of the space between heartbeats where all creatures speak the same language. The stallion stretched his neck up, bringing his head level with the boy's ledge. His nostrils flared, breathing. In Dancing Cloud's scent, hot breath washed over the boy's face, carrying the wild perfume of sage and freedom. Below, the other horses stood motionless, as if carved from the living rock. With trembling fingers, Dancing Cloud reached out. His hand hovered for a moment in the space between them, the space between the world of men and the world of spirits. Náshdóítso closed the distance, pressing his velvet muzzle against the boy's palm. The touch was like fire and starlight, burning away the last barriers between them. The stallion shifted his position, presenting his broad back. The message was clear as dawn breaking over the desert. Dancing Cloud glanced at his grandmother's knife, still wedged in the rock above him. In one smooth motion, he pulled it free and tucked it into his belt. Then, gathering the last of his strength, he eased himself onto the stallion's back. Náshdóítso's muscles bunched beneath him, powerful as a thunderstorm. The descent was a blur of moonlight and shadow, of hoofbeats echoing off stone, of manes flowing like dark water in the night. The other horses moved with them, their bodies creating a living corridor of protection as they picked their way down the cliff face. When they reached the canyon floor, dancing clouds swayed, nearly falling, but the stallion stood steady as stone. Beneath him, waiting until the boy had found his balance. Around them, the herd moved in closer, their bodies radiating warmth in the desert night. A young mare stepped forward to nuzzle his dangling foot, her touch as gentle as his grandmother's hand. In that moment, surrounded by the spirit horses under a sky full of stars, Dancing Cloud felt something shift deep inside him. He was no longer the forsaken child, cast out to die on the red cliff. He had been chosen by something older than his tribe's laws, something as wild and eternal as the wind itself. The horse songs his grandmother had taught him took on new meaning. They were not just songs about horses, they were songs of becoming. Dawn found Dancing Cloud curled between the warm bodies of two mares, their presence forming a living shelter against the desert's chill. His throat, soothed by the water they'd led him to in the night, no longer burned. His body ached from the ordeal on the cliff, but beneath the pain lay a deeper sense of rightness, as if he had finally found his true place in the world. Náshdóítso stood guard at the entrance of the small box canyon where the herd had made camp, his proud silhouette rimmed in gold by the rising sun. Other horses moved around Dancing Cloud, going about their morning rituals with a precision that spoke of ancient patterns. He watched, remembering his grandmother's words. To understand the horses, you must first learn to see with their eyes, to think with their minds. The first lesson came with the morning grass. A young dun mare approached him, her steps delicate. As the dancers, in her mouth she carried a bundle of sweet grass, still wet with dew. She dropped it at his feet, then stepped back, ears pricked forward expectantly. Dancing Cloud recognized the gesture. He had seen mares do the same with their foals, teaching them which plants were good to eat. "Thank you," he whispered, reaching for the grass. But before his fingers touched it, Náshdóítso's sharp whinny cut through the morning air. The boy froze, then understood. He watched as the stallion demonstrated, dropping his head to graze, then lifting it to scan the horizon. A constant rhythm of eating and watching that all the horses followed. Dancing Cloud mimicked the pattern, bending to take the grass, then straightening to look around before chewing. The young mare nickered softly, and he felt the approval ripple through the herd like a warm breeze. This was their first language, the language of survival, of staying alert even in moments of peace. Throughout the morning, the lessons continued. A pair of yearlings showed him how to test the wind, their nostrils flaring as they caught scents he could barely imagine. An old mare with a graying muzzle taught him to read the subtle shifts of weight that telegraphed a horse's intentions before they moved. Each lesson was offered with infinite patience, as if the herd understood that they were teaching him to bridge the gap between their worlds. But it was Náshdóítso who taught him the deepest lessons. The great stallion would stand beside him for hours, allowing Dancing Cloud to place his hands on his warm hide and feel the muscles shift beneath the skin. Through touch, the boy learned to read the minute tensions that signaled danger, the relaxation that meant safety, the rippling patterns that formed words more eloquent than any human speech. As the sun climbed higher, Dancing Cloud found himself moving more and more like the horses, his own body adopting their fluid grace. When a shadow passed overhead, he looked up at the same instant as the herd, his muscles tensing in unconscious unity with theirs. When one of the mares called out a warning at a distant sound, he understood the meaning as clearly as if she had spoken in his own language. During the hottest part of the day, the herd gathered in the shade of a towering rock wall. Dancing Cloud sat with his back against Náshdóítso's flank, weaving strands of the stallion's mane into a delicate bracelet. Each hair seemed to hold a spark of the horse's power, and as he worked, he hummed one of his grandmother's songs. To his amazement, several of the horses began to hum with him. their deep chest voices creating harmonies that made the very air vibrate. This, he realized, was the true language of the spirit horses, not just movement and touch, but music itself. The songs his grandmother had taught him were translations of something far older, a way of speaking that existed before words, when the world was young, and the boundaries between species were as thin as morning mist. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Náshdóítso rose and moved to the center of the herd. The other horses gathered around him in a pattern that Dancing Cloud was beginning to recognize as their council circle. The stallion's call rang out across the canyon, and this time the boy understood it was not just a call, but an invitation. On legs that trembled only slightly, Dancing Cloud rose and walked to Náshdóítso's side. The stallion lowered his head, and the boy laid his hand between those fierce, intelligent eyes. In that touch was a question and an answer, a beginning and an ending. He was no longer just a castaway child being sheltered by wild horses. He was becoming something else, something that existed in the space between human and horse, between earth and sky. The herd moved around them in a tightening circle, their bodies creating a living wall of flesh and spirit. As the last light of day painted the canyon walls in shades of flame and shadow, Dancing Cloud felt the last pieces of his old life fall away. The horse songs rose in his throat, no longer memories but living things, born anew in the wild heart of the desert. The herd moved deeper into the canyon lands as the moon waned, following ancient paths known only to the spirit horses. Dancing Cloud learned to read the landscape through their eyes, where water might hide beneath sun-baked earth, which narrow trails could support a horse's weight, how to tell if a cave was empty or might harbor mountain lions. They came upon the ancient paintings at sunset. The canyon walls here were different, smoother, decorated with images that made Dancing Cloud's breath catch in his throat. Horses, drawn in red ochre and white clay, galloped across the stone. Their forms were simple yet powerful, capturing the essence of movement in a few bold strokes. Among them were human figures, arms raised in what could have been supplication or celebration. Náshdóítso approached the wall slowly, his hooves silent on the sandy ground. The stallion stretched his neck forward until his muzzle nearly touched. One of the painted horses, Dancing Cloud, watching from a few paces back, felt a shiver run through his body. The painted horse could have been Náshdóítso's twin, right down to the proud arch of its neck. A soft nicker from one of the mares drew his attention to the canyon's depths. The light was failing fast, but he could make out the shapes of stone, pillars rising like the bones of ancient giants. Between them, shadows moved in ways that made his scalp prickle. The herd bunched closer together, their bodies tense with awareness. "Mountain lions," Dancing Cloud whispered, recognizing the electric tension in the air. He could feel Náshdóítso's muscles bunch beneath him, ready for whatever might come. The stallion's ears swiveled, tracking sounds too faint for human ears. The attack came from above. A tawny shape launched itself from a ledge, aiming for one of the younger horses. But the herd moved as one, the older mares surging forward to shield the yearling, while Náshdóítso spun with impossible speed. His hooves struck sparks from the stone as he reared, striking out at the big cat. Dancing Cloud clung to the stallion's back, his body moving in perfect synchronization with the horses. He felt no fear. There was no room for it in the focused intensity of the moment. Instead, he found himself singing one of the warrior songs his grandmother had taught him, its rhythm matching the thunder of hooves and the screams of the battling cats. For the mountain lions were hunting in pairs. The second cat revealed itself on their flank, but this time Dancing Cloud saw it coming. He shifted his weight, pressing his leg against Náshdóítso's side in a signal they had developed over the past days. The stallion responded instantly, pivoting to face the new threat, while the herd reformed around them in a defensive circle. The battle was brief but fierce, When it ended, one mountain lion lay still on the canyon floor, while its mate retreated into the gathering darkness. The herd had suffered only minor scratches, testament to their incredible coordination and the leadership of both Náshdóítso and Dancing Cloud realized with a start himself. As the dust settled, he slipped from the stallion's back and walked to the cave paintings. His fingers traced the outline of a horse that seemed to dance between earth and sky. Near it, he found a piece of red ochre, worn smooth by time. Without thinking, he picked it up and added his own mark to the ancient wall. Not a horse, this time, but the shape of a boy riding a mighty stallion, their forms so intertwined it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Náshdóítso approached as he finished, breathing warm air against the back of Dancing Cloud's neck. The boy turned and pressed his forehead against the stallion's, sharing breath in the way of the herd. In that moment of connection, he understood that the cave paintings were more than art. They were a record of the eternal dance between horses and humans, a dance he was now part of. That night, as the herd rested in the shelter of the stone pillars, Dancing Cloud dreamed of the painted horses stepping down from the canyon walls, their hooves striking thunder from the sky. In his dream, he rode among them, no longer a cast-out child but a bridge between worlds, keeper of ancient songs and new mysteries. The sound of rushing water drew them from the Shadowlands, a constant thunder that grew louder with each passing hour. Dancing Cloud felt Náshdóítso's anxiety beneath him. Not fear exactly, but a deep respect for the power that lay ahead. The canyon had been widening gradually, its walls stepping back like the pages of an opening book, and now they understood why. The river cut through the land like a great silver serpent, its waters swollen with late spring melt from distant mountains. Dancing Cloud had never seen so much water in one place. The herd approached the bank cautiously, their hooves sinking into mud that held the tracks of other animals, deer, elk, even the massive paws of bears. A young mare dipped her muzzle to drink, then snorted and backed away as a surge of water splashed up. Dancing Cloud slid from Náshdóítso's back and knelt at the river's edge, remembering his grandmother's teachings about water spirits. He pulled a single black hair from the stallion's mane and cast it into the current, watching. As it was swept away, "A gift for safe passage," he murmured, then turned to study the river more carefully. The water was deep and fast in the center, but he could see places where the current slowed, where rocks broke the surface like the backs of sleeping turtles. These would be their stepping stones if they were brave enough to try. Náshdóítso stamped impatiently, but Dancing Cloud held up his hand. "Wait," he said, both in words and in the body language he had learned from the herd. "Watch how the water moves." Together they observed the river's patterns, how it swirled around certain rocks, where the surface smoothed out over deep channels, where fallen trees created dangerous hidden snags. The stallion's ears pricked forward as understanding dawned. He began to walk along the bank, Dancing Cloud at his shoulder, both of them mapping the safest route. The rest of the herd followed, spreading out along the shore, but staying well back from the treacherous mud. A flash of black caught Dancing Cloud's eye, a smooth river stone polished by centuries of water. He picked it up, feeling its cool weight in his palm. Something about it spoke to him of power and protection. Without thinking, he slipped it into his medicine pouch alongside his grandmother's knife. The crossing began as the sun reached its peak. Náshdóítso led the way, choosing his steps with deliberate care. Dancing Cloud moved with him, one hand resting on the stallion's powerful shoulder. The water was shockingly cold, numbing their legs within moments. Behind them, the herd entered, the river in single file, each horse placing their hooves exactly where those before them had stepped. Halfway across, disaster struck. A young colt, frightened by a sudden surge of water, lost his footing. His terrified whinny cut through the river's roar as the current swept him downstream. Without hesitation, Dancing Cloud swung onto Náshdóítso's back. The stallion needed no guidance. He was already moving, powerful muscles bunching as he fought the current. They caught up to the colt just before the rapids began. Dancing Cloud leaned out, singing a song of courage as he grabbed the colt's mane. Náshdóítso shoulder-checked the younger horse, steering him toward a gravel bar that jutted into the current. The colt scrambled for footing, found it, and lunged forward onto solid ground, but the effort had cost them. The current seized them, dragging them toward the rapids. Dancing Cloud felt Náshdóítso's muscles trembling with fatigue. In that moment, he reached into his medicine pouch and clutched the river stone. Its cool smoothness seemed to pulse in his hand, and suddenly he knew what to do. He began to sing, not a horse song this time, but a water song, one his grandmother had taught him for calming storm-swollen streams. Náshdóítso added his voice, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to make the very water vibrate. Together their song rose above the river's roar, and for a breathless moment Dancing Cloud could have sworn the current gentled around them. With a final surge of strength, Náshdóítso found his footing and lunged for the shore. They collapsed, on the gravel, gasping for breath as the rest of the herd thundered up around them. The colt they had saved pressed close, trembling, while his mother nickered soft thanks. That night, as they made camp in a meadow above the river, Dancing Cloud added the black river stone to his bracelet of horsehair. It hung there like a drop of captured midnight, a reminder that true partnership meant facing fears together, trusting each other when the current ran swift and deep. The first warning came on the wind, the acrid scent of wood smoke where no fire should be. Dancing Cloud felt Náshdóítso stiffen beneath him, the stallion's nostrils flaring as he tested the air. The herd, grazing peacefully moments before, lifted their heads in perfect unison, ears pricked toward the eastern rim of the canyon. In the weeks since the river crossing, Dancing Cloud had learned to trust the herd's instincts as his own. He slipped from Náshdóítso's back and pressed his ear to the ground, just as he had seen the old mare do when sensing distant danger. Through the earth came the faint but unmistakable vibration of horses, not the free-flowing movement of wild ones, but the regulated march of shod hooves, horse hunters. The words formed in his mind with the chill of winter wind. His grandmother had spoken of them, men who came from the settlements seeking to capture wild horses for breaking and selling. They were known for their cruel methods, running herds to exhaustion, separating foals from mothers, using ropes and whips where gentle words would serve better. Among the rocks near their resting place, Dancing Cloud found what he was looking. Farner's an old Apache shield, its leather weathered but still strong, its surface decorated with faded symbols of protection. He recognized the patterns from his grandmother's teachings: thunder marks for strength, lightning strikes for speed, spiral clouds for confusion of enemies. Náshdóítso approached as Dancing Cloud examined the shield, his breath warm against the boy's neck. Together, they studied the canyon around them. The boy saw it now as the stallion did, not just as a landscape, but as a tactical ground. Here, a narrow passage where a few horses could hold off many. There, a hidden valley, perfect for sheltering the vulnerable members of the herd. Above, a series of ledges where scouts could watch unseen. The rest of the herd gathered around them, sensing the importance of the moment. Dancing Cloud began to hum softly, a strategy song combining the horse songs of his grandmother with the warrior songs of his people. Through the music, he shared his plan with the herd. They moved as shadows through the deepening dusk, dividing into smaller groups, as Dancing Cloud had envisioned. The older mares led the foals and yearlings to the hidden valley, while the stronger horses positioned themselves along the canyon's natural bottlenecks. Náshdóítso and Dancing Cloud took their place on a high ledge where they could oversee the entire operation. Through the night, they watched the horse hunters' fires bloom, like earthbound stars in the distance. Dancing Cloud counted 5, maybe 6 camps spread out in a wide arc. Too many to fight directly, but perhaps enough to outthink. He remembered the stories his grandmother told of how the smallest spider could defeat the largest eagle. Not through strength, but through wisdom. Using skills learned from the herd, they began to set their trap. Young stallions crashed through brush at random intervals, creating the illusion of a much larger herd, moving in multiple directions. Mares called to each other across the canyon, their voices echoing off the walls until it seemed as though dozens of horses surrounded the hunter's position, but their masterstroke came just before dawn. Dancing Cloud had noticed how the morning wind always swept down from the canyon's rim, carrying with it the sense of whatever lay above. He led several horses in circles through a patch of blooming sage, then up to the ridgeline where the wind would catch their scent. The hunter's horses caught the smell first, the wild, intoxicating perfume of free horses mixed with sage and stone dust. They began to stamp and whinny, straining at their ropes. Dancing Cloud smiled in the darkness, feeling Náshdóítso's quiet approval. The hunters would follow the scent, thinking they were closing in on their prey, only to find themselves led further and further from the herd's true location. As the first light of dawn touched the canyon rim, Dancing Cloud pressed his hand against the ancient shield. Its symbols seemed to pulse with a power of their own, connecting him to all the warriors who had defended these lands before. He was no longer just surviving with the horses. He was becoming their protector, their strategist, their bridge between the world of men and the world of spirits. Náshdóítso's soft nicker drew his attention to movement below. The hunters were breaking camp, following the false trail just as he had planned. But this was only the beginning. Dancing Cloud knew that once men set their sights on something, they rarely gave up easily. This first victory would need to be followed by many more if the spirit horses were to remain free. The wind changed at midday, bringing with it the first hints of smoke. Dancing Cloud felt Náshdóítso's muscles tense beneath him even before he saw the dark clouds billowing above the eastern ridge. The horse hunters carelessly tended fires, had done what he had feared most. They had escaped into the drought-parched forest. A young mare screamed in panic as the first waves of fleeing wildlife streamed past them, deer, rabbits, and coyotes running shoulder to shoulder in their desperation to escape. The fire was moving faster than any horse could run, driven by winds that seemed to feed on fear itself. Dancing Cloud could hear the roar of it now, like 1,000 angry spirits devouring everything in their path. He found himself clutching a piece of charred wood that had drifted down from above, its surface still warm with deadly promise. Without thinking, he slipped it into his medicine pouch, a reminder of this moment when nature's power dwarfed all human concerns. The herd bunched around him, and Náshdóítso, their eyes wide with terror, waiting for guidance. In that moment of crisis, Dancing Cloud's mind cleared like a storm-washed sky. He could see the whole canyon spread out before him like one of his grandmother's medicine blankets, each feature a sign, each path a possibility. The river lay 3 valleys to the west, but the fire would cut them off long before they could reach it. To the north, the canyon narrowed into a deadly trap. South led to open plains, where the fire would roll over them like a wave of death. But to the east, toward the fire itself, there was another option. Dancing Cloud remembered a place they had passed days earlier, a series of bare rock formations rising from the forest floor like the spine of some ancient beast. If they could reach it in time. He pressed his legs against Náshdóítso's sides, sharing his vision through touch and thought. The stallion understood immediately, wheeling to face the rest of the herd. His call rang out above the fire's roar, not a cry of panic, but a clear command that galvanized the horses into action. As they rode toward the flames, Dancing Cloud caught sight of the horse hunters' camp in disarray. Men scrambled to free their terrified mounts, while others grabbed what supplies they could carry. Without hesitation, he turned Náshdóítso toward them. A hunter looked up in astonishment as the great bay stallion emerged from the smoke like a spirit of legend, the boy on his back seeming to glow in the fire's light. "Follow!" Dancing Cloud shouted in both Apache and Spanish, gesturing toward the rock spine. He saw understanding dawn in their eyes. In this moment, there was no divide between wild and tame, hunter and hunted. There was only survival. The race against the fire became a blur of heat and thunder. Dancing Cloud led them along hidden game trails, through narrow passes where the flames couldn't follow, always angling toward the rocky sanctuary. Náshdóítso moved with incredible sure-footedness, choosing each step with precision, even as burning branches crashed around them. The rest of the herd followed, with the hunters' horses integrated seamlessly into their formation. They reached the rock spine as the fire front hit. Dancing Cloud directed everyone into a natural bowl formation, between the stone ridges, where a spring-fed pool offered some protection. The horses, both wild and domestic, crowded together while flames roared past on either side. Sparks rained down like deadly stars, but they bounced harmlessly off the bare rock. Through the worst of it, Dancing Cloud sang. Not the horse songs, this time, but the fire songs his grandmother had taught him. Ancient melodies that spoke of fire's dual nature as destroyer and purifier. The horses added their voices, their deep humming rising above the inferno's roar. Even the hunters joined in, their rough trail songs blending with the older music in a harmony that seemed to hold the flames at bay. Hours later, as the fire moved, on and the sky began to clear, Dancing Cloud found himself looking at the charred landscape with new eyes. Where others might have seen only destruction, he saw possibility. The fire had cleared away the old and made room for new growth. Already he could feel the land preparing itself for renewal. The hunters approached him cautiously, respect evident in their bearing. One of them, an older man with eyes as weathered as canyon walls, held out a handful of sugar cubes, a peace offering. "We were wrong about these horses," he said in halting Apache. "They are not meant for breaking." Dancing Cloud accepted the sugar, sharing it among the nearest horses. In saving their would-be captors, the spirit horses had demonstrated a nobility that no words could have conveyed. As Náshdóítso stood proudly beside him, steam rising from his fire-warmed coat, Dancing Cloud knew they had won something far more valuable than a simple escape. They had won understanding. Winter descended on the canyonlands like a hunting hawk, swift and merciless. The first snow caught the herd as they were moving through a high mountain pass, the flakes as large as eagle feathers and twice as cold. Dancing Cloud, who had never seen snow before his exile, watched in wonder as the familiar landscape transformed into something alien and beautiful. Náshdóítso led them to a sheltered valley where the winds were less bitter and patches of grass still showed through the deepening snow. But the stallion's usual confidence seemed shaken. This was not his familiar territory of red rock and sage. This was a realm of ice and shadow, where every decision could mean the difference between survival and death. The wolves made their presence known on the third night. Their howls echoed off the ice-rimed canyon walls, sending shivers through the herd. Dancing Cloud counted at least 8 distinct voices in their song, a large pack made bold by winter's hunger. He could see their eyes gleaming in the darkness beyond the reaches of their nighttime fire, pairs of amber lights that winked in and out like malevolent stars. The alpha wolf left them a message the next morning, a fresh-killed rabbit placed deliberately at the edge of their camp. Around its neck hung a leather cord strung with teeth from previous kills. The meaning was clear, an offering, but also a warning. The wolves were willing to share their hunting grounds, but they would set the terms. Dancing Cloud studied the necklace of wolf teeth, reading the story it told. Some were from deer, others from elk, and a few that could only have come from other wolves. This pack's leader was both wise and fierce, much like Náshdóítso himself. After a long moment of consideration, the boy added the necklace to his growing collection of sacred objects, knowing it would play a role in whatever was to come. The test came at dawn. The herd had scattered slightly, searching for grass beneath the snow, when the wolves attacked. They came in perfect formation, a crescent of grey shadows flowing across the white landscape. Their target was a young mare who had strayed too far from the group, but their true goal was to assess the herd's strength and leadership. Dancing Cloud felt Náshdóítso gather himself beneath him, ready to charge to the mare's defense. But the boy laid a gentle hand on the stallion's neck, holding him in place. He had been watching the wolves, learning their ways just as he had learned the ways of the horses. This was not a fight that could be won with hooves and teeth alone. Instead of charging, Dancing Cloud began to sing. The wolf song rose from deep in his chest, a melody his grandmother had taught him that spoke of ancient pacts between hunters, of territories respected and boundaries honored. Náshdóítso added his voice, his deep chest rumbling with tones that seemed to make the very snow vibrate. The alpha wolf stopped his advance, head cocked to one side as he listened. Dancing Cloud slid from Náshdóítso's back, moving slowly through the snow until he stood between the wolves and the young mare. The alpha's eyes met his, not with hunger now, but with something closer to curiosity. From his medicine pouch, Dancing Cloud withdrew the tooth necklace. He held it up so it caught the dawn light, then deliberately placed it in the snow before him. Next to it, he laid a single black hair from Náshdóítso's mane. The offering was both acknowledgement and proposition, respect for the wolves' power, but also a reminder of the horse's strength. The alpha approached alone, his pack hanging back in perfect discipline. He sniffed the offerings, then raised his head to study Dancing Cloud more carefully. The boy stood his ground, continuing his song. In that moment, he felt the presence of all his ancestors, the great chiefs and medicine men who had learned to bridge the gaps between different peoples, different species. What happened next would become part of both wolf and horse legend. The alpha wolf picked up the tooth necklace in his jaws, walked a circle around Dancing Cloud and the young mare, then placed it back in the snow. With deliberate care, he added one of his own teeth to the string, not a trophy taken in battle, but freely given. The pack melted away into the forests, but not before their howls rose one last time, a song that seemed to answer, Dancing Cloud's own. The young mare pressed against the boy's back, trembling not with fear now, but with relief and gratitude. Náshdóítso approached and touched his nose to the wolf tooth, acknowledging the new alliance. That night, as the herd huddled together for warmth, Dancing Cloud added the wolf's tooth to his bracelet, where it hung alongside the riverstone and other tokens of his journey. Each piece told a story of learning, of bridges built between different worlds. Winter's grip might still be strong, but they would face it together, horses, humans, and wolves, each bringing their own strength to the circle. The winter winds carried more than just snow. They brought familiar voices drifting down from the high country. Dancing Cloud recognized the hunting songs of his people long before he saw them. The sound stirred something deep within him, a mixture of longing and apprehension that made his heart flutter like a trapped bird. Near a stand of snow-laden pines, he found an old tribal drum, half buried in a drift. Its hide was weathered but still strong, its voice still clear when he brushed the snow away and tapped it gently. The drum's presence was no accident. Hunting parties always carried one to signal their location to other tribal members. His people were near. Náshdóítso sensed his rider's tension, shifting restlessly beneath him. The great stallion had led the herd in a wide circle around the hunting party's likely path, but now they had reached a point where paths must cross. The valley ahead was too rich in winter forage to bypass, yet it would bring them within sight of the Apache hunters. Dancing Cloud pressed his face into the stallion's warm mane, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and freedom. He was no longer the frightened boy they had abandoned on the cliff face. The seasons had changed him, just as they changed the land itself. His grandmother's knife rode at his belt, and his bracelet of tokens told the story of who he had become. Not just a survivor, but a bridge between worlds. The decision was made for them when a young foal, straying too far in search of grass, nickered in surprise at finding hunters' tracks. The sound carried in the crystal winter air, and answering calls came from the hunting party. They had been spotted. Instead of fleeing, Dancing Cloud made a choice that would change everything. He guided Náshdóítso to a rise overlooking the valley, where they would be clearly visible against the snow-bright sky. The rest of the herd spread out behind them, presenting a sight that seemed to belong more to legend than reality. A boy astride a mighty stallion, leading a band of spirit horses through the winter-touched land. He saw the hunters freeze in their tracks, bows half drawn, then slowly lowered. Among them was his uncle, Three Hawks, who had once taught him to track deer through the summer forests. The man's face showed a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been shame. "The spirits are playing tricks," one hunter whispered. But Dancing Cloud's uncle shook his head. "No," Three Hawks said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "This is no trick. This is the boy we cast out, returned to us with powers we did not understand." Dancing Cloud lifted the drum he had found, testing its voice with fingers that remembered countless evenings spent learning the sacred rhythms at his grandmother's fire. The beat he chose was ancient, older than the horse songs, older even than the Apache themselves. It spoke of cycles completed, of endings that became beginnings. Náshdóítso added his voice to the drum's song, and one by one the other horses joined in. The sound rolled across the snowy valley like summer thunder, causing the hunters' horses to prick their ears forward in recognition. Even the birds fell silent, as if listening to a story they had long forgotten. Three Hawks stepped forward, arms raised in the gesture of peace. "Sister's son," he called, using the formal term of relationship, "we have much to answer for." Dancing Cloud's response was not in words. Instead, he guided Náshdóítso down the slope toward the hunting party. The great stallion moved with deliberate grace, his hooves barely marking the snow. As they drew closer, the boy could see tears freezing on his uncle's weathered cheeks. "Your grandmother," Three Hawks said softly, "she never lost faith. Even after, she kept your place in the lodge, kept your spirit bundle hanging above the door. She said you would return when the horses themselves chose to bring you home." Dancing Cloud felt something shift inside his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. He reached down and touched the tokens on his bracelet, the river stone, the wolf's tooth, all the markers of his journey. Each one had taught him something about strength, about survival, about the different shapes that family could take. "I am not returning," he said, his voice rough with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel. "I am building a bridge, one that all may cross, if they come with open hearts." That night, as the hunters made camp at a respectful distance from the herd, Dancing Cloud wove a dream catcher using strands of Náshdóítso's mane. His grandmother had taught him that such moments of great change required ceremony to guide the way forward. The black horsehair shimmered in the firelight as he worked, each strand seeming to hold memories of their shared journey. The fast began at moonrise. Following the old ways, Dancing Cloud took only water and small sips of a tea, made from sacred herbs he had gathered during their travels. Náshdóítso stood guard nearby, understanding without words that something important was taking place. The other horses moved quietly around them, their usual nighttime sounds muted as if in respect. As the moon reached its peak, Dancing Cloud hung the completed dream catcher from a snow-laden branch and began to sing. The melody came not from memory, but from somewhere deeper, as if the horses themselves were singing through him. He sang of the red cliff where his journey began, of the river crossing where trust became strength, of the fire that turned enemies into allies, of wolves who taught him the wisdom of wild things. The first vision came with the night wind. He saw himself as he had been, a frightened boy clinging to a cliff face, but now he watched through eagle's eyes as wild horses spiraled up the sheer rock like water flowing in reverse. He understood then that his exile had not been a punishment, but a calling, a way of clearing his eyes so he could see what had always been there. The second vision brought his grandmother's voice, though whether from memory or spirit he could not tell. "The horse songs are older than our people," she seemed to whisper. "They are the earth's first language, spoken in hoofbeats and flowing water, in wind through canyon walls, and thunder in summer skies." He saw himself as a bridge, his body made of light, spanning the gap between the world of men and the world of spirits. The third vision came with dawn's first light. He saw horses running across the sky, their hooves striking sparks that became stars. Among them ran wolves, their songs twining with the thunder of hooves. Below, people watched in wonder, learning to see with new eyes. At the heart of it all was a figure that was both boy and horse, neither and both, keeping the balance between all worlds. When Dancing Cloud opened his eyes, Náshdóítso stood before him, the dream-catcher's intricate web reflected in the stallion's deep brown eyes. The boy reached out to touch the horse's forehead, and in that moment their minds met with perfect clarity. He saw through the stallion's memories, countless moons of leading the herd, of teaching young ones the old ways, of keeping alive, the knowledge that horses had carried since the world was young. He understood then that Náshdóítso had recognized something in him that day on the cliff, just as his grandmother had seen it when he was born. The power to walk between worlds was not something given to him during his exile. It had always been there, waiting to be awakened by necessity and nurtured by the wisdom of the spirit horses. The hunters approached as the sun cleared the horizon, led by 3 hawks. They had witnessed parts of his vision quest from afar, seen the way the horses moved around him in perfect harmony, heard the songs that made the very air shimmer with power. His uncle knelt in the snow before him, offering a medicine bundle that Dancing Cloud recognized. His own, kept safe by his grandmother all these moons. "The tribe's council fire burns," 3 hawks said softly. "They would hear your words. Sister's son, they would understand this new path you have found." Dancing Cloud looked at the dream catcher, swaying gently in the morning breeze, its web glinting with frost crystals that caught the light like tiny stars. He thought of his grandmother's teachings about how all paths eventually lead in a circle, bringing us back to ourselves, but with new eyes, new wisdom. "We will come," he said finally, one hand resting on Náshdóítso's warm neck, "not as wanderers seeking forgiveness, but as teachers bringing ancient wisdom made new. The spirit horses have chosen to share their knowledge again, if there are those willing to learn." The dreamcatcher cast its shadow on the snow, a perfect circle intersected by straight lines like the spokes of a great wheel. Dancing Cloud saw in it the pattern of his life, the center point of his exile, the radiating lines of his journeys, and the circle that would bring him back to his people, carrying gifts more precious than gold. They came with the spring winds, wild horses from every direction, drawn by something they felt in their bones. Palominos from the high country, their coats like captured sunlight. Paint horses from the western canyons, dappled as clouds at sunset. Dark horses from the forest lands, moving like shadows through the new grass. Dancing Cloud sat beside the council fire, watching the peace pipe being prepared with the same sacred herbs he had once crushed in his grandmother's mortar. 3 hawks had brought word to the tribal elders, and they had come, not just from his own band, but from other Apache groups who had heard the stories of the boy who ran with spirit horses. Náshdóítso stood at the edge of the firelight, his presence drawing admiring looks from even the most seasoned horse handlers among the tribes. Other stallions had brought their herds close, something unheard of in the memory of even the oldest storytellers. The night air thrummed with their quiet nickering, a conversation older than human memory. In the time before time began the eldest of the medicine men, lifting the pipe toward the stars. Our people and the horses were one people. We forgot this truth, but the spirits did not. His eyes met dancing clouds across the fire. "Now they have sent us a reminder." The peace pipe made its way around the circle, each person taking a ceremonial puff before passing it on. When it reached Dancing Cloud, he added his own prayer to those that had come before, not just for peace between tribes, but for understanding between all peoples, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. As if in answer to his prayer, a new sound rose from the gathering herds. A harmony of horse voices, deep and powerful. The wild herds were singing together, something that happened only in the oldest legends. Dancing Cloud felt the Dreamcatcher's web quiver where it hung at his belt, resonating with the ancient music. One by one, the leaders of the free herds approached the council fire. Dancing Cloud translated their movements, their sounds, their intentions for the assembled elders. Through him, an agreement began to take shape. Territories would be respected, water sources shared, and most importantly, the spirit horses would remain free while teaching their wisdom to those worthy to learn. An old woman, her face as weathered as canyon walls, unwrapped a bundle she had carried far to this meeting. Inside was a peace pipe unlike any Dancing Cloud had seen. Its stem was decorated with horsehair from mane to tip and carved with running horses that seemed to move in the firelight. "This pipe has waited 7 generations," she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "It was made when the first horse spirits returned to our lands, and it was promised that one would come who could bridge the gap between their world and ours." The pipe was passed to Dancing Cloud. As he held it, memories cascaded through him, not his own, but older ones, passed down through generations of both horses and humans. He saw the first meetings between his people and the horses, the wonder and fear on both sides, the gradual building of trust that became partnership. Náshdóítso approached the fire, something no wild horse had done in living memory. The great Stallion touched his nose to the pipe in Dancing Cloud's hands, and a murmur went through the gathered people. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny the power of what they were witnessing. Other horses followed their leader's example, approaching the circle of firelight not with fear, but with dignity. Young colts pranced at the edge of darkness, while wise old mares stood like senators at a great council. Dancing Cloud felt the threads of destiny weaving together, creating a pattern that would change both peoples forever. The old woman spoke again, her voice carrying to the farthest edges of the gathering. "The boy who was cast out has returned. At the bridge, the horses who were seen as mere creatures have shown themselves to be teachers. The circle is complete." Dancing Cloud rose, the peace pipe held high. His voice, when it came, carried both the wisdom of his grandmother's teachings and the wild freedom he had learned from the horses. "We are given a new beginning," he said. "The spirit horses offer their friendship not as servants, but as equals. They will teach us their songs again if we have the wisdom to listen." As if in answer, Náshdóítso threw back his head and called to the night sky. The sound was taken up by every horse in the gathering, their voices rising in a thunder that shook the very earth. The people sat in awe, witnessing the return of something ancient and powerful, the renewal of a covenant as old as the land itself. The warning came with the dawn wind, the sharp crack of a rifle splitting the morning. Silence. Dancing Cloud was awake instantly, his hand finding the lightning-struck branch he had collected during the last storm. The wood still hummed with power, as if the sky's fire had gone to sleep within its grain, rather than dying. Náshdóítso was already alert, his ears swiveling toward the sound. Through their bond, Dancing Cloud felt the Stallions' assessment. These were not the same horse hunters they had encountered before. These were professionals, men who supplied the army's endless appetite for cavalry mounts. They had come in force, with rifles and rope and steel-jawed traps. The great gathering had made them too visible, too tempting a target. Dozens of prime horses, including the legendary spirit horses that every hunter dreamed of catching. But what the hunters saw as vulnerability, Dancing Cloud recognized as strength. Never before had so many free herds worked together, guided by the combined wisdom of their oldest leaders. He touched the lightning branch to Náshdóítso's shoulder, sharing his plan through the contact. The stallion's muscles bunched beneath him in understanding. Around them, the other herd leaders waited, their bodies tense but controlled. The hunters would expect panic, a chaotic scatter of frightened horses. Instead, they would meet something unprecedented. The first wave of hunters appeared along the ridgeline, silhouetted against the rising sun. Their tactics were clear. They meant to drive the herds into the narrow canyon to the south, where hidden men waited with ropes and rifles. It was a strategy that had worked countless times before. But Dancing Cloud had learned from both horses and wolves about the art of turning hunters into prey. He raised the lightning branch high, and its surface caught the morning light like captured fire. The signal rippled through the gathered herds faster than any human command could have traveled. The horses moved like a great wave, but not in flight. The older mares and young foals streamed toward the northern highlands, while the stronger horses split into smaller bands that circled behind the hunter's position. Dancing Cloud and Náshdóítso led the central group straight toward the ridge line, their hooves striking thunder from the earth. The hunters' confidence wavered at this unexpected charge. Their carefully planned drive dissolved into confusion as they found themselves surrounded by horses moving with deliberate purpose. Rather than fear, from the high ground, the tribal observers who had stayed after the great gathering watched in amazement as the boy they had once cast out orchestrated a battle plan worthy of the greatest war chiefs. Lightning split the sky, though no storm clouds were visible. The branch in Dancing Cloud's hand buzzed with renewed energy, and he felt his grandmother's teachings surge through him. This was old magic, the kind that lived in the space between earth and sky, between human and horse, between physical and spiritual worlds. The hunters' horses, many of them captured from wild herds, began to rebel against their riders. The song of freedom carried by the wind awakened memories of their own wild days. Several threw their riders and joined the circling bands of free horses, their steel shoes striking sparks from stone as they reclaimed their birthright. Dancing Cloud guided Náshdóítso through the chaos with the precision of a dancer. Where hunters gathered to regroup, the horses would charge through their formation. Where traps had been laid, wild stallions would leap the trigger lines and scatter the waiting men. The lightning branch traced patterns in the air that seemed to draw down the power of the sky itself. The decisive moment came when the leader of the hunters, a scarred man with cold eyes, drew a bead on Náshdóítso with his rifle. Before he could fire, a wolf's howl echoed across the battlefield. The pack that had formed an alliance with Dancing Cloud during the winter emerged from the shadows, not to attack, but to remind all present that the wild places had their own laws, their own guardians. The hunter's rifle wavered, then lowered. In his eyes, Dancing Cloud saw the moment of understanding. That some forces were not meant to be contained, that true power lay not in conquest, but in respect. One by one the hunters withdrew, leaving behind their traps and ropes as offerings of peace. As the dust settled, Dancing Cloud dismounted and pressed his forehead to Náshdóítso's, sharing breath and gratitude. The lightning branch had grown warm in his hand, and where it touched the ground, small flowers began to bloom, life emerging from the aftermath of conflict. The horse songs rose around them, no longer just music, but a declaration of freedom that would echo through generations to come. In the days following the battle, people began arriving from distant tribes, drawn by stories of the boy who could speak with spirit horses. They came bearing gifts and seeking wisdom, but Dancing Cloud recognized a deeper hunger in their eyes, a longing to reconnect with something their people had nearly forgotten. Among his grandmother's belongings, sent by the tribe after his return, he found a mask unlike any other. One half was carved with human features, the other with the flowing lines of a horse's face. This two-spirit mask, she had written, was meant for one who could walk in both worlds. Dancing Cloud understood now why she had kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment, the right person. He wore the mask for the first time at a gathering unlike any in tribal memory. Representatives from every Apache band sat in a great circle, with the leaders of the wild herds forming an outer ring. Náshdóítso stood beside Dancing Cloud as he addressed both peoples, those who walked on two legs and those who ran with four. "The horses remember," he began, his voice carrying the rhythms of both human speech and horse song. "They remember when we first met, when trust was new and fragile as a spring leaf. They remember how that trust grew into partnership, and how partnership became brotherhood. But they also remember how some forgot the old ways, treating brothers as slaves, trading freedom for control." A murmur went through both circles, acknowledgement from the humans, approval from the horses. Dancing Cloud continued, one hand resting on Náshdóítso's neck. "The spirit horses have chosen to renew the ancient covenant. They offer to teach us again, not as masters over servants, but as equals sharing wisdom." He laid out the terms that had come to him during his vision quest. Sacred territories would be established where no horse could be captured, no rope thrown, no brand applied. These would be the domains of the spirit horses, places where they could live free, and where those worthy to learn could come to study their ways. "But this is not separation," he explained, touching the two-spirit mask. "This is balance. The horses understand that our peoples are stronger together than apart. They will send teachers, horses who choose to live among us, to help us remember the old songs, to show us how to move between worlds as they do." As if on cue, several horses from different herds stepped forward. These were the ones who had shown interest in human ways, who had approached the tribal camps out of curiosity rather than need. They would be the first bridges, choosing their own human partners from among those who showed the right spirit. Dancing Cloud demonstrated the new way of partnership, moving with Náshdóítso through a series of movements that were part dance, part ceremony. There were no ropes, no bridles, no force, only the language of trust built up over countless days of learning each other's ways. "Watch," he told the gathered people. "See how he moves of his own will, how we think as one but remain two. This is the truth the spirit horses want us to remember, that the strongest bonds are those that honor freedom." Throughout the day, he worked with both horses and humans, teaching the basic steps of communication. Some learned quickly, their hearts already open to the old ways. Others struggled, generations of different thinking slowly giving way to new understanding. The horses showed infinite patience, each working in their own way to bridge the gap between worlds. As sunset approached, Dancing Cloud faced his greatest challenge. The army officers who had been sending the horse hunters arrived under a flag of truce. They had witnessed the morning's battle, seen the power of horses moving in harmony with human allies rather than under human control. "Your ways are not our ways," their leader said gruffly. "But perhaps there is room for both in this territory." He offered a formal treaty, one that would protect the spirit horses' lands from future hunting expeditions. In return, they asked only that Dancing Cloud and those he trained would help them better understand the horses already in their care. Dancing Cloud accepted the treaty with the gravity it deserved. This too was part of building bridges, helping those from outside understand the value of freedom, the power of partnership freely given. As he signed the document, Náshdóítso pressed close, adding his own mark with a print of his muzzle in earth mixed with morning dew. The two-spirit mask, and caught the last rays of sun, its carved features seeming to shift and flow in the changing light. Dancing Cloud saw in it a reflection of the future they were building, not a single bridge between worlds, but countless connections, each unique as the individuals who forged them. The spirit horses had not just saved him that day on the cliff. They had shown him a way to save something precious that belonged to all peoples. The journey back to his childhood lodge felt like walking through a dream. Dancing Cloud rode beside his grandmother's empty travois, which the tribe had preserved in her honor. Upon it rested her blessing bowl, its surface worn smooth by decades of sacred ceremonies. The familiar weight of Náshdóítso beneath him and the precious bowl before him connected past to present, bridging the gap between the boy he had been and the leader he had become. The village appeared different through his new eyes. What had once seemed like permanent structures now looked temporary against the eternal landscape of canyon and sky. Children stopped their play to watch him pass, their eyes wide as they recognized the legendary Spirit Horse King from their parents' stories. But it was the older people's faces that caught at his heart. He saw in them recognition of something ancient returning, something they had feared was lost forever. Sharp Knife, the warrior who had once accused him of dark medicine, was the first to approach. The man's proud shoulders were bent now, heavy with the weight of wrong judgment. "We saw darkness where there was only a different kind of light," he said, placing a handful of sacred tobacco in the blessing bowl. "Can you forgive an old man's fear?" Dancing Cloud dismounted, feeling the solid earth beneath his feet. He lifted the blessing bowl and added to it a few strands of Náshdóítso's mane. "There is nothing to forgive," he said. "Fear taught me to be strong. Exile taught me to be free. All paths serve the greater journey." His grandmother's lodge still stood, kept in perfect condition by the women of the tribe. Inside, everything remained as she had left it. Her medicines, arranged on their shelves, her weaving loom threaded with an unfinished blanket, her sleeping robes folded neatly beside the fire pit. And there, hanging above the door, was his spirit bundle, just as Three Hawks had said. Dancing Cloud untied the bundle with trembling fingers. Inside were the small treasures of his childhood, an eagle feather from his first hunt, a perfect shell from a trading journey, a smooth stone that his grandmother had said held stories. To these he added the tokens of his journey, the river stone, the wolf's tooth, a braid of Náshdóítso's mane. The old and new mingled together, completing a circle he hadn't known he was drawing. The tribe gathered as the sun began to set, forming a circle around him and Náshdóítso. The blessing bowl passed from hand to hand, each person adding something. Herbs, beads, prayers. When it returned to him, it was full of memories and hopes, regrets, and new beginnings. "My grandmother." "So truly," Dancing Cloud said, his voice carrying to all present. "She knew that sometimes we must lose everything to find what was always ours. The spirit horses did not just save my life that day on the cliff. They showed me, showed all of us, that the old ways are not lost. They are waiting to be remembered." Poured the contents of the blessing bowl into the evening fire. Sweet smoke rose toward the stars, carrying with it the last barriers between past and present, between human and horse, between exile and homecoming. Náshdóítso lifted his head and called out, his voice echoed by every horse in the village. Both the domesticated ones and the wild ones who had followed Dancing Cloud home. From the darkness beyond the fire came an answering call. Wolves, acknowledging their alliance. And from above, an eagle's cry completed the harmony. Dancing Cloud felt the threads of all his grandmother's teachings weaving together into a pattern that finally made sense. She had prepared him not just to survive exile, but to transform it into something powerful. That night, as he slept in his grandmother's lodge with Náshdóítso standing guard outside, Dancing Cloud dreamed of her. She was young again, dancing with spirit horses under a sky filled with stars. "You see now," she said in the dream, her eyes bright with joy, "all circles close, but they close in their own time, in their own way. You have opened a path that others will follow." He woke to find tears on his cheeks and a single black feather beside his head, a raven's gift, symbol of transformation. Outside, the morning star blazed above the canyon rim, its light catching the dew on Náshdóítso's coat and turning him to living silver. The prophecy was fulfilled, but Dancing Cloud knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning, a new trail, leading into a future where ancient wisdom and new understanding would run together like tributaries joining to form a mighty river. Years passed like wind through canyon walls, each season bringing new students to learn the ways of the spirit horses. Dancing Cloud's legend grew, but it was his work that left the deepest mark on the land and its people. Children born in those years grew up knowing both worlds, learning the horse songs as naturally as they learned to walk. Among his most treasured possessions was a small stone fetish carved in the shape of a running horse. The old ones said it had been made from the same red rock where he had once clung as an exile. He used it as a teaching tool, passing it from hand to hand as he shared the stories of his journey, helping others understand that the greatest wisdom often came from the hardest trials. The army kept its word. The territories of the spirit horses became sacred ground, where no rope could be thrown, no brand applied. Other tribes began sending their own seekers, and Dancing Cloud welcomed them all. Náshdóítso, his coat now touched with silver, but his spirit still fierce as storm winds, helped him choose which horses would become teachers and which students were ready to learn. They traveled together through the seasons, this boy-turned-legend and his spirit horse companion. They attended councils where their wisdom helped settle disputes between tribes, between settlers and natives, between the old ways and the new. The horse songs spread, carried on the wind and in the hearts of those who learned them, becoming a bridge between all peoples who sought to understand the deeper rhythms of the land. One autumn morning, as golden light painted the canyon walls, a young girl arrived at Dancing Cloud's teaching lodge. She carried herself with the quiet dignity he recognized from his own childhood, and her eyes held the same hunger for understanding that had once filled his own. "My grandmother sent me," she said softly. "She says I hear the old songs in my dreams." Dancing Cloud placed the stone fetish in her small hands and watched her face light up with recognition. Without being told, she began to hum one of the horse songs, not perfectly, but with a natural grace that made Náshdóítso's ears prick forward in interest. "Come," Dancing Cloud said, leading her to where the great stallion waited. "Let me tell you a story about a boy who thought he was cast out, only to discover he was being called home." As he shared his tale once again, he saw the future unfolding like a flower opening to morning sun. This child would carry the teachings forward, adding her own wisdom to what he had learned. And there would be others after her, each finding their own way to bridge the worlds between earth and sky, between human and horse, between what was and what could be. The spirit horses still ran free in the high places, their hooves striking thunder from stone just as they had in the oldest stories. But now they chose to share their wisdom with those who approached with open hearts. The wolf pack still hunted the borderlands, maintaining their ancient alliance. And in the villages, new generations grew up knowing that the strongest bonds were those that honored freedom. Dancing Cloud's own journey had become part of the land itself, a story told in hoofprints and horse songs, in the paths that wound between tribal lands and wild places. The boy, who had once clung to a cliff face, had become a bridge, just as his grandmother had foreseen. But more importantly, he had shown others how to build their own bridges. The stone fetish passed from hand to hand through the years, smooth as a river stone from countless touches. Those who held it said they could hear the horse songs in its depths, could feel the pulse of hooves against sacred ground. It carried the memory of a time when one boy's exile had opened a path back to ancient wisdom, when the spirit horses had chosen to teach again, when the circle between worlds had been restored. And so the legacy grew, not as a single story, but as many stories, each one unique as the individuals who lived it. The spirit horses continued their eternal dance between earth and sky, calling to those who could hear, teaching those who would learn. And in the wind that swept the canyons, one could still hear the echo of that first song, the song of a boy who had learned to run with wild horses, who had turned exile into homecoming, who had shown that the greatest journeys always lead us back to ourselves.